The teller looked at my driver's license, then at the debit card, and then back at me. She repeated it twice. That was when I stopped thinking I had come in for something simple. "Is there a problem?" I asked. She gave me the kind of polite bank smile that usually means someone is about to ask you a question they already know the answer to. "Your husband really didn't tell you." I stared at her. "Tell me what?" She hesitated, then turned back to her computer. "Before we go any further, I just need to verify a couple of things." That made me sit up straighter. 3 days earlier, I had gotten married. Nothing fancy, no ballroom, no 12-tier cake that nobody wanted to eat. Daniel and I got married at the Wake County Courthouse on a Friday afternoon, then had dinner with family and a few close friends at a small Italian restaurant in Cary. 3 days later, my new husband handed me a debit card with my name on it. "Buy whatever you want," he said. I laughed. Dangerous sentence. He smiled. I asked what account it was connected to. Ours. That was it. Ours. Now I was sitting in a bank branch on my lunch break because apparently I had reached an age where romance was nice, but I still wanted to know which account was paying for the romance. The teller verified my social security number, address, signature, and a few other details. Then she said, "Okay, you're listed as a joint account holder." Good. So he hadn't accidentally put some other Claire Bennett on there. She smiled, but only slightly. Then she turned the screen toward me. I looked. Then I looked again. At first, I honestly thought I was reading the number incorrectly. I leaned closer. "No," I said. The teller didn't say anything. I counted the digits, then counted them again. There were millions of dollars sitting in an account with my name attached to it. Not business assets, not real estate. Cash. I leaned back. The teller lowered her voice. "I'm guessing this is new information." I gave her a look. "Lady, I teach 4th grade. If I had known this yesterday, I would not have packed leftover meatloaf for lunch." That got a small laugh from her. I needed it because all I could think about was Daniel, my husband. The man who drove a beat-up 2004 Ford Taurus with a cracked rear bumper and one hubcap that had apparently left the marriage before I entered it. The man I had once offered a coupon for tires. The man who let me split dinner checks for almost a year. I walked out of the bank and sat in my Honda with the engine off. Then I called him. "Hey," he said. "Daniel." Something in my voice must have caught his attention. "Yeah." "What exactly do you mean when you say you work in commercial property?" Silence. Not a long silence, just long enough. Then he said, "Where are you?" "Outside the bank." Another pause. "Don't drive." "I wasn't planning to." "I'm coming." He hung up. I sat there and stared through the windshield. The ridiculous thing is, if you had asked me a year earlier whether Daniel Bennett was wealthy, I probably would have laughed. Not because he looked poor. He just looked ordinary. And ordinary had been exactly what I wanted. By 37, I hadn't given up on love. I had given up on hunting for it. There's a difference. I had spent enough years letting friends introduce me to men who were perfect for me because they had a pulse, a mortgage, and no visible felony record. Dating apps were worse. One man described himself as financially independent and then asked if I could pay for his Uber home. So no, I wasn't bitter. I was tired. I taught 4th grade at a public elementary school outside Raleigh, owned a modest townhome, had good friends, and had finally reached the point where a quiet Friday night didn't feel like evidence that something had gone wrong with my life. That was when Daniel showed up, or more accurately, kept showing up late. His daughter Sophie was in my class. Sweet kid, smart, observant, and stubborn in a way I secretly respected. Daniel was one of those parents who always arrived at pickup looking like he had apologized to 6 people on the drive over. "Sorry," he'd say. "Traffic." Or, "The meeting ran over." Or once, I swear I do know what time school ends. He drove that old Taurus every day. Faded blue paint, cracked bumper, interior that smelled faintly like coffee and crayons. When people asked what he did, he said he worked in commercial property. I pictured leases, building maintenance, maybe property management. I never asked what he earned. Why would I? The first time we really talked was when Sophie got sick at school. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. Her hair was messy, and he looked genuinely scared. "She okay?" "Fever. She'll survive. She's also furious because I told her she can't go to soccer practice." He nodded. "That sounds like her." Sophie, lying on the cot in the nurse's office, muttered, "I can still play." Daniel looked at me. You see what I'm dealing with? I smiled. I spend 7 hours a day with her. Then you have my condolences. That was Daniel. Dry, quiet, never trying too hard. He didn't ask me out while Sophie was still in my class. I respected that. He waited until summer. Then one afternoon I ran into him at a grocery store. He was holding a bag of charcoal in one hand and staring at 2 bottles of barbecue sauce like national security depended on the choice. He saw me. Miss Parker. Claire. School's out. Claire. He looked mildly nervous. That surprised me. Then he said, would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I remember looking at him. Single dad, old car, nice smile, nothing flashy, nothing that looked like trouble. And I thought, why not? Coffee became dinner. Dinner became weekends. Daniel wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. He forgot flowers, but remembered that I hated cilantro. He could make exactly 3 decent meals and somehow destroy eggs. He was good with Sophie in ways that mattered. He listened when she talked. He apologized when he was wrong. He never treated parenting like something he deserved applause for. About a year later, he proposed. Before the wedding, he told me his family had money in commercial real estate and that he needed a prenup. That didn't bother me. I had my own attorney review it. Daniel had interests in several family companies and properties. Substantial assets, my lawyer said. I understood that, but substantial is a flexible word. I thought Daniel was comfortable, maybe even very comfortable. I did not think 8 figures, and I certainly didn't think millions of dollars sitting in a regular account. 20 minutes after I called him, that ancient Ford Taurus pulled into the bank parking lot. Daniel got out. I watched him cross toward my Honda. A man worth more money than I could comfortably imagine, wearing a shirt I had bought him on sale. He opened the passenger door and sat down. I didn't say hello. I just looked at him. Then I said, start talking. Daniel closed the passenger door and sat there for a second with both hands resting on his knees. He looked exactly like the man I had married 3 days earlier. That was almost irritating. Same rumpled shirt, same watch with the scratched leather band, same little crease between his eyebrows when he was trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. Claire, he said. No, don't start with my name like that. He nodded once. Okay, start with the account. He exhaled. The account is ours. I gathered that. I added you after the wedding. I gathered that, too. He looked out the windshield. I waited. Finally, I said, Daniel, there are millions of dollars in there. I know. That answer made something in me snap into place. Not anger exactly. Clarity. You know, yes, and you thought maybe I didn't need to. No, that's not what I thought. Then what did you think? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his wedding ring. That I thought I would explain everything after the wedding. I turned toward him. After? I know how that sounds. It sounds like there was something to explain before. He looked at me then. There was. So I folded my arms. Go ahead. Daniel told me his father had started Bennett Commercial Properties in the late 70s with one small warehouse outside Greensboro. By the time Daniel was in college, the company had grown into medical office buildings, shopping centers, storage facilities, and industrial property across North Carolina and Virginia. Daniel owned a controlling interest. There were other investments, too. Real estate partnerships, a couple of private funds, some land. I listened quietly until he used the phrase 8 figures. Then I blinked. 8? He nodded, as in yes. I sat back against the seat. Daniel? I know. No, I don't think you do. He stopped talking. I looked at him. You let me buy you tires. His face tightened. They were good tires. That is not helping. I know. You remember when I told you that the mechanic on Hillsborough Street was cheaper? Yes. You let me negotiate a tire rotation for you. He actually looked ashamed. That was a bad day. I stared at him. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because otherwise I might have said something regrettable in a bank parking lot at 11:30 on a Tuesday. You let me split dinner checks. You insisted. Because I thought you were raising a kid by yourself and scraping things together. I never said I was scraping things together. That did it. I turned fully toward him. No, you just watched me believe it. He went quiet, and there it was. The part that mattered. Not the money. Not the Taurus. Not the fact that I had apparently married a man whose idea of comfortable had its own tax strategy. He knew what I thought, and he had let me think it. I wasn't testing you, he said. I didn't say you were. You're thinking it. I'm thinking a lot of things. He nodded. Fair. I looked through the windshield for a moment. Why? He took his time. My first marriage. I knew he had been divorced. I knew Sophie's mother lived in Charlotte and saw her on alternating weekends during the school year. Daniel had never spoken badly about her. That had been one of the things I liked about him. He had said only that the marriage had become ugly around money and family. Now he gave me more. When I was younger, I talked about money too much. Not bragging, just I didn't understand how unusual any of it was. That sounds believable. He gave me a look. Thank you. You're welcome. He went on. People treated me differently. Women sometimes did too. And after my marriage fell apart, I stopped leading with any of it. So you downgraded to a Taurus. That wasn't part of a plan. I'm listening. I moved into a smaller house because Sophie was 6 and I wanted her somewhere normal. I kept the car because I liked it. I raised an eyebrow. That is the least believable thing you've said so far. That got the smallest smile. Then it disappeared. I wanted a quieter life. I understand that. I didn't want Sophie growing up thinking every half. The relationship came with a financial calculation attached. I understand that too. He looked relieved. I held up a hand. That doesn't make what you did okay. The relief disappeared. Claire, privacy is what you keep from strangers. I'm your wife. He looked down. I know. No, you know now. That landed. For a while, neither of us said anything. Finally, I asked, why give me the card? I thought it would make things easier. How? We're married now. I wanted you to have full access to the household account. So you gave me access before you gave me the truth. He looked away again. Yes. There was no defense in his voice that time, only admission. That helped a little. Not enough. We drove home separately. When we got there, Daniel pulled out the chair at the kitchen table for me, like we were about to negotiate a peace treaty. I sat. He stood at the counter. Then he said, if you want, I can take you off the account. I stared at him. That's your solution? No, I just mean if it makes you uncomfortable. It's not the account that makes me uncomfortable. He nodded. Right. A minute later, he said, your Honda's getting old. I closed my eyes. What? I'm just saying if you want a new car. Daniel, he stopped. You really think the car is the problem? No, you literally just offered me a car. I know. Please stop trying to spend your way out of this. That was the first time he looked genuinely embarrassed. Okay. I took the debit card out of my wallet and placed it on the table. He looked at it, then at me. Keep it. No, it's yours. That's not why I'm giving it back. He nodded slowly. I know. I pushed it toward him. I need to understand what our marriage actually is before I start spending money from it. He sat across from me. That was when he said, we probably need to talk to my mother. I almost laughed. Why? And Vanessa, my sister. I had met both of them several times. Margaret was elegant, controlled, and always perfectly dressed. Vanessa was sharper. Not rude exactly, just the kind of woman who could ask whether you wanted dessert in a way that made you wonder if dessert was a moral failure. What do they have to do with this? Daniel hesitated. My stomach dropped a little. They knew, I said. He didn't answer. I leaned back. Daniel, they knew I hadn't been told everything. Everything meaning how much money you have? Yes. I stared at him. Who else knew? He looked miserable. That was answer enough. I laughed once. So I was the only person at my own wedding who didn't understand the financial situation. That's not fair. No, my friends don't know details. But your family did. Yes, and they knew I didn't. Yes? That was worse than the balance because now the whole past year rearranged itself again. Every polite smile, every careful question, every time Margaret had asked what I planned to do after the wedding, I had thought she was making conversation. Maybe she had been taking inventory. Dinner with them happened that Sunday. Margaret served roast chicken, green beans, and potatoes in a dining room that looked like nobody had ever spilled anything in it. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, kissed Daniel on the cheek, and gave me a long look. Not hostile. Just different. We made it through dinner before she finally said, well. Daniel looked up. Vanessa took a sip of wine. I suppose the secret's out. I set down my fork. Daniel said, Vanessa, what is it? I looked at him. Not her. Him. Because that word bothered me more than I expected. Secret. Not privacy. Not discretion. Secret. Margaret changed the subject, or tried to. A few minutes later, she looked at me and said, You're still planning to teach? I assume. Our eyes met. Yes, I said. She nodded. Of course. I waited, then asked, why wouldn't I? Her smile was small. No reason. There was absolutely a reason. And for the first time since the bank, I understood that finding out Daniel had money was only the first surprise. The next one was going to be finding out what his family thought that money would turn me into. Margaret didn't call me a gold digger. Honestly, I almost wish she had. An insult is something you can answer. It's much harder to argue with a raised eyebrow and a perfectly reasonable question. So, you'll stay at the school? She asked. Yes. For how long? I looked up from my coffee. For as long as they continue paying me, I suppose. Vanessa smiled into her wineglass. Margaret ignored that. I only meant that you have options now. I had options before. Of course. There was that phrase again. Everything Margaret said sounded gracious until you listened to it twice. We had moved from the dining room to the den after dinner. Daniel was beside me on the sofa. Vanessa had taken an armchair across from us, and Margaret sat near the fireplace with her coffee. She asked whether I planned to sell my townhome. I said I hadn't decided. Vanessa asked whether Daniel and I were going to renovate his house. I said the kitchen worked fine. Then came travel. Then private school for Sophie. Then whether I intended to keep contributing to my retirement account. By the fifth question, I put down my cup. Is there something you actually want to ask me? The room went still. Daniel shifted beside me. Margaret said, Claire, nobody is interrogating you. I didn't say anybody was. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other. You have to admit your circumstances changed rather dramatically this week. No, my circumstances changed when I married Daniel. My information changed this week. That shut her up for about 3 seconds. Then she said, You signed a prenup? Yes. So you knew what Daniel had. I knew his family had substantial assets. Vanessa gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. That irritated me more than if she'd simply said so. My attorney reviewed the agreement. I continued. I knew Daniel owned interests in family companies and real estate. I knew those assets would remain his. And you didn't ask what they were worth. No. Why not? I shrugged. Because I was deciding whether to marry your brother. I wasn't valuing an acquisition. Daniel made a noise beside me that might have been a cough covering a laugh. Vanessa didn't find it funny. The truth was less dramatic than she wanted it to be. Before the wedding, Daniel had given his disclosures to my attorney. There were pages of LLC names, ownership percentages, property interests, and investment accounts. My lawyer had walked me through the parts that mattered to me. What would remain Daniel's? What would remain mine? What would happen to assets we built together? What rights was I giving up? I asked questions about all of that. I didn't take every commercial building listed on Schedule B, research its market value, multiply it by Daniel's ownership percentage, and create a spreadsheet called How Rich Is My Fiancé? I knew he had money. I thought maybe a few $1,000,000 spread across property and family holdings. That's a very different picture from the one I'd seen at the bank. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. I'm sure you can understand why we're cautious. There it was. We. Daniel has been through a difficult divorce. I glanced at him. I know, and Sophie has to come first. Of course she does. Vanessa said, things can become complicated when significant assets are involved. I looked at her. Are you worried I'm going to steal the shopping centers? Claire, Daniel said quietly. No, I'd genuinely like to know. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Margaret stepped in. Nobody is accusing you of anything. That sentence usually means somebody has been discussing the accusation extensively. I turned to Daniel. Did you talk about this before we got married? His expression changed only slightly. That was enough. Daniel said, my family had concerns about me, about the situation. I laughed once. What situation? He lowered his voice. Me remarrying? That isn't what I asked. Margaret said, Claire, this isn't productive. I looked at her. With respect, Margaret, I just found out 3 days after marrying your son that everyone at this table knew something about my marriage that I didn't. I think I've earned one unproductive conversation. Nobody had much to say to that. We left 20 minutes later. Daniel waited until we were in the car before speaking. They weren't sitting around plotting against you. I didn't say they were. You're acting like... He stopped. That was smart. I looked out the passenger window. Streetlights moved across the windshield. Finally, I said, "Did they think knowing about your money would change me?" He kept his eyes on the road. "My mother worries." "That isn't an answer." "Yes." I turned toward him. "And you know too much too fast." I watched him. "Then why didn't you tell me?" His jaw tightened. "I already explained that." "No, you explained why you don't tell strangers. You explained why you don't advertise it. You explained why Sophie doesn't grow up in some gated mansion." I paused. "You haven't explained why your fiancé wasn't allowed to know." "Allowed? Fine. Trusted." He flinched at that one. "Good." "I wasn't testing you," he said. "Then why does everybody act like I passed?" He had no answer. The next few days were strange. Not terrible, strange. Daniel and I went to work. Sophie stayed with us. I made spaghetti Tuesday night. Daniel forgot to buy Parmesan. We watched half a movie and both pretended we weren't thinking about the same thing. Then Thursday evening, I asked about his first marriage. Not the polite version, the real one. He sat at the kitchen island while I put away dishes. "I've told you." "You told me money changed things." "It did." He was quiet for a while. His ex-wife Melissa had wanted a bigger house, more travel, more of the lifestyle Daniel had grown up around. They fought over spending. But the more Daniel talked, the less simple the story became. Margaret had distrusted Melissa from the beginning. Vanessa had questioned every purchase. Melissa eventually started fighting back. Daniel's response had been to withdraw. "I didn't want to take sides," he said. I stopped with a plate in my hand. "You were married." "I know. So there weren't three sides." He looked at me. I was trying to keep the peace. I put the plate away. "You weren't neutral, Daniel. You just made sure nobody could blame you for choosing." He went very still. I regretted the sharpness for maybe half a second. Then I remembered the bank. Later that week, I noticed an old wedding photograph at Margaret's house when we stopped by to pick up Sophie. Margaret couldn't have been more than 22. She looked nervous and beautiful beside Daniel's father. On the drive home, I mentioned it. Daniel smiled faintly. "Granddad hated that wedding." "Why?" "He didn't think Mom was good enough for Dad." I looked at him. "Seriously?" "Wrong family. Not enough money. All that nonsense." I turned toward the window. "Interesting." A week later, Margaret asked Daniel to review the family estate plan. That part didn't bother me. Sophie should be protected. I said so. "If anything affects my rights, though, I want my attorney to review it." Daniel agreed immediately. Margaret did not look pleased. 2 days later, Daniel got a call about a Bennett family meeting concerning the trusts and company holdings. He told me over breakfast. "What time?" "Thursday at 4. "I can leave school by then." He hesitated. "You don't need to come." I looked up. "Why?" "It's mostly family business." "I thought I was family." "You are." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He rubbed his forehead. "It'll just be easier if I go." I studied him for a moment. Easier for whom? He didn't answer. I didn't tell him not to go. I didn't demand an invitation either. I just picked up my coffee. "Go." He looked surprised. Then I said, "I'm not asking you to fight with your mother." "I know. I'm asking you to notice something." "What?" I met his eyes. "Whether keeping the peace means sacrificing me." For once, Daniel didn't have a careful answer ready. And that worried me more than if he'd argued. Daniel came home from the family meeting at 6:15. I remember the time because I was draining pasta, and Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table trying to convince me that 9-7 was somehow open to interpretation. 62? She said. "Try again." 64. "You're moving in the wrong direction." The garage door opened. Daniel walked in, loosened his tie, kissed Sophie on top of the head, then came over and kissed my cheek. "How'd it go?" I asked. "Fine." One word. Fine. If you've been married long enough, or taught children long enough, you learn that fine usually means additional questions are required. "What did you discuss?" "The trusts, some company stuff, Sophie's inheritance, and nothing we need to worry about tonight." I turned off the burner. That sentence bothered me. Not because I thought Daniel was lying. Because I was beginning to recognize the way he told the truth while quietly removing the parts he thought might cause trouble. So I didn't push. Not that night. The next evening, I asked again, "Did Vanessa say anything about me at the meeting?" Daniel looked up from the mail. "Why?" That wasn't a no. He put the envelopes down. "She had some concerns." "What concerns?" "The same ones." "Say them." "Claire, please." He rubbed the back of his neck. She asked whether you really had no idea about the money before we got married. I waited. And? What did you say? He looked toward the living room. Sophie was upstairs. Daniel? I told her you didn't know. Something in his voice was off. When? He frowned. What? When did you tell her? He didn't answer. That was when I knew. I put both hands on the kitchen counter. What did you say when she first asked? Nothing. I stared at him. Nothing. Not right away. How long is not right away, Daniel? It was a couple seconds, and then I said, I didn't think you knew. I actually thought I'd misheard him. You didn't think I knew? I worded it badly. You've known me for more than a year. I know. You married me. I know. You were the person withholding the information. I know. And when your sister suggested I might have secretly figured it out and married you anyway, you had to think about it. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I nodded. That's worse. His face changed. What is? You said nothing. I was caught off guard. No, Vanessa accused your wife of deceiving you, and for a few seconds you considered whether she might be right. I didn't consider it. Then why didn't you answer? He looked exhausted. I don't know. That at least was honest. I went upstairs. I packed. Enough clothes for several days. Daniel followed me into the bedroom. What are you doing? I'm going to Ruth's. Claire, come on. I need some space. For 2 seconds, I stopped folding a sweater. No. Over the fact that you're still measuring me. I'm not. You are. Your mother does it out loud. Vanessa does it with that face she makes. You do it quietly, which somehow makes it harder to see. He sat on the edge of the bed. I love you. I know. And I did. That was the miserable part. If I hadn't loved him, the whole thing would have been much easier. I zipped the bag. When I came downstairs, Sophie was standing near the bottom step. She looked at my suitcase. Where are you going? I glanced at Daniel. To Aunt Ruth's for a few nights. Ruth wasn't actually her aunt, but Sophie had started calling her that months earlier. Why? Your dad and I need a little time to work something out. Her eyes moved between us. Daniel said, Soph, you're okay. Children know when adults use the word okay because nobody is. I hugged her. I'll call you tomorrow. She nodded. I left before I could talk myself out of it. Ruth lived 15 minutes away in a ranch house she'd bought after her divorce. She took one look at my overnight bag and said, Guest room's clean, wine's questionable. Perfect. She didn't interrogate me. That's why we'd been friends for 17 years. The next morning, I went to school. Fourth graders have a wonderful ability to make your private crisis irrelevant. By 9:10, I was mediating an argument over a purple mechanical pencil. At lunch, I ate yogurt while answering an email from a parent who wanted to know why her son had received a B on a book report he had not actually turned in. Life kept moving. That helped. The hard part came that evening. Sophie called. We talked about school first, then she went quiet. Claire. Yeah? Are you still my stepmom if you don't live here? I sat down on Ruth's bed. Oh, sweetheart, because Madison's stepdad moved out and now she doesn't see him. This isn't about you. I know. No, I mean it. Whatever your dad and I are working through, none of it is because of you. But are you still my stepmom? Yes. The answer came easily. Then she asked the harder question. Are you coming home? I looked at the wall. I don't know yet. She was quiet. But I'm not disappearing on you. Okay. After we hung up, I sat there for a while. That was the first time I understood that whatever decision I made about Daniel wasn't going to affect only Daniel. 3 days later, he came to Ruth's. He brought no flowers. Good start. Then he ruined it. I could pay off your student loans, he said. I stared at him. We were sitting at Ruth's kitchen table. What I've been thinking. You shouldn't still be carrying those, Daniel. And your Honda is 11 years old. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, he looked almost hopeful. You keep trying to fix the only problem we don't have. His shoulders dropped. I don't know what else to do. Tell the truth before I have to drag it out of you. I am now. He looked down at his hands. Then slowly, he started talking about Melissa. Really talking. He admitted his first wife had made bad choices with money, but Margaret had distrusted her before those choices. Vanessa had questioned her constantly, and Daniel had stood between them, telling himself he was keeping everybody calm. I thought staying neutral was the responsible thing. You weren't neutral? I know that now. You chose whichever side asked the least courage from you. He looked at me. This time, he didn't argue. A few days later, Margaret called. She asked if we could meet privately. I almost said no. Curiosity won. We met at a quiet restaurant near North Hills. Margaret arrived with a leather folder. That should have warned me. She waited until we'd ordered coffee, then slid it across the table. What is this? A proposal. I opened it. There were enough legal words that I knew better than to pretend I understood all of them, but I understood the number. It was substantial, very substantial. In exchange, I would agree to additional limits on future claims involving Daniel's family assets. I looked up. You're offering me money. I'm offering certainty. For whom? For everyone. I closed the folder. Does Daniel know? No. Of course he didn't. Margaret folded her hands. Eventually, Claire, money changes everyone. I thought about that old wedding photograph, the nervous young woman standing beside Daniel's father. Did it change you? For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret's expression slipped just for a second. Then it was gone. She didn't answer. I took the folder with me because I wanted my lawyer to see it. Back at Ruth's, I put it in the dresser drawer. I stood there with my hand on the handle and thought, Daniel doesn't need to know yet. It sounded reasonable. He was already fighting with his family. Telling him would only make things worse. I could wait. I could decide when the time was right. Then I heard the sentence again in my own head, and I realized, with considerable annoyance, that I was starting to sound exactly like my husband. I kept Margaret's folder in Ruth's dresser for 2 days. That's not a long time. Unless you've spent the previous month lecturing your husband about withholding information, then 48 hours starts to feel surprisingly educational. I had reasons. Good ones, too. Daniel was already barely speaking to his mother. Sophie was unsettled. I hadn't decided what I thought about Margaret's proposal, much less what I wanted to do about it. Telling Daniel immediately would only create another explosion. That was what I told myself. Then Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee at Ruth's kitchen table when she walked in wearing a bathrobe and opened the refrigerator. You tell him yet? I looked up. No. She took out the cream. Why? I'm thinking about taking it. No. That answer came quickly. Ruth poured coffee. Then what are you thinking about? I opened my mouth. Nothing useful arrived. Ruth nodded. That's what I thought. I hate when you do that. I know. She sat across from me. I'm not telling you what to do, but you've spent 3 weeks furious because Daniel decided what information you needed and when you needed it. I'm aware of the irony. Good. Saves time. That afternoon I called him. Can you come over? He was there in 20 minutes. I put Margaret's folder on the table. Your mother gave me this. Daniel opened it all. I watched his face as he read. By the second page, his jaw tightened. Then he saw the number. She did what? Keep reading. He didn't. He reached for his phone. I put my hand over it. Don't. Claire, she offered my wife money to... I know what she offered. This is insane. He looked at me. She gave it to me Thursday. His anger stopped cold. Thursday? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? There it was. A completely fair question. I almost wasn't going to. His eyebrows lifted. Why? I sat back. Because you were already dealing with your family. Because Sophie's upset. Because I thought telling you would make everything worse. He waited. And because I told myself I was protecting you. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I said, that's when I finally understood how easy it is to call secrecy protection. Daniel looked down at the folder. I'm sorry. So am I. It was the first conversation we'd had since I left, where neither of us was trying to win. That mattered. It didn't fix us, but it mattered. Over the next few weeks, Daniel did something I hadn't expected. He stopped making promises. Instead, he started making appointments. He found a therapist. He told Margaret and Vanessa that he would no longer discuss me with them unless I was present or had agreed to the conversation. And when Margaret tried to argue that she was protecting Sophie, Daniel told her that protecting his daughter did not require treating his wife like a pending lawsuit. I heard that part later. He didn't call me afterward expecting praise. That mattered too. One evening, he came to Ruth's and sat with me on the porch. I need to say something, he said. Okay. I don't need you to prove you don't want my money. I looked at him. He continued. I think I did before, even if I didn't admit it to myself. That one hurt, but it also helped because it was true. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. "I know." I still wasn't ready to move home. A week later, I met with my attorney. Not because I had decided to divorce Daniel, because I hadn't. I wanted to know what a separation would actually mean if we couldn't repair things. Daniel found out because I told him. We were having coffee when I said I met with Susan yesterday. He knew who Susan was. His face changed. "Your attorney?" "Yes, about the prenup, about everything." He stared into his coffee, then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you leaving me?" "I don't know." I expected an argument or panic. Instead, after everything I'd done, Daniel swallowed and nodded. "Okay." That was all. Okay. It was strangely painful and strangely comforting. For once, he wasn't deciding for me. A few weeks later came the Bennett Family Foundation dinner. I almost skipped it. Then I realized I would be staying away because Margaret and Vanessa had made me uncomfortable. I was tired of arranging my movements around their comfort. So I went. It was held at a hotel ballroom in downtown Raleigh. Nothing outrageous. About 100 people. Local nonprofit directors, business associates, family, friends. Daniel and I arrived together. Not hand in hand, but together. Margaret greeted me politely. Vanessa managed almost 40 minutes before she couldn't help herself. We were standing near our table when someone complimented my dress. Vanessa smiled. "Well, Claire's had quite a change in circumstances lately." It was subtle enough that the other woman probably didn't catch it. I did. Daniel did too. "Vanessa," he said. I touched his arm. "No, it's okay." She looked at me. I said, "Your mother offered me quite a lot of money a few weeks ago." Her smile disappeared. Margaret, standing nearby, went very still. I didn't mention the amount. I didn't need to. "Claire," Margaret said, "I'm not trying to embarrass you. You have an interesting way of showing it." "Probably." I looked around the small circle of family members near us. Everybody in this family keeps asking what I do for Daniel's money. Then I looked at Margaret. Nobody ever bothered asking what I do for Daniel. Margaret's voice tightened. "I was protecting my son and my granddaughter." I thought of the photograph. "You told me once that family protection mattered more than hurt feelings." "It does." "Daniel told me his grandfather didn't want you marrying his father." Margaret's expression changed. Vanessa looked at her. I continued carefully. "Someone once made you prove you belonged in this family." Margaret said nothing. "And instead of making sure nobody else ever had to feel that way, you made it a family tradition." For the first time, Margaret lost that polished calm. "You have no idea what I had to put up with." Her voice wasn't loud, but it shook. "He thought I was after the Bennett name. He had people check my family. He told my husband I would leave the minute something better came along. I spent years proving him wrong." I nodded. "I believe you." That seemed to surprise her. Then I said, "That's why I thought you'd know better." Margaret looked away. No dramatic apology followed. Real life rarely schedules those on cue. Then Daniel spoke. "My mother isn't the only one who owes Claire an apology." I turned toward him. He wasn't looking at Margaret. He was looking at me. "Claire didn't deceive me. I let her marry me without fully understanding an important part of my life because I was afraid knowing the truth might change her." Vanessa started to speak. Daniel held up a hand. "And when you questioned her, I hesitated." He paused. "That's on me." No one said anything. Vanessa left before dessert. Margaret stayed, but she barely spoke. I didn't feel triumphant. I mostly felt exhausted. But for the first time since the bank incident, I didn't feel like I was standing in a courtroom where everyone else had already seen the evidence. Outside the hotel later, Daniel walked me toward my car. "Are you coming home tonight?" he asked. I looked at him. "Not tonight." The hurt was visible on his face, but he nodded. "Okay." No bargaining, no promises, no offer to buy anything. He kissed my cheek and walked toward his car. I stood there watching him leave. And the strangest thing happened. For weeks, Daniel had been trying to convince me to come home. That night, he finally stopped. And for the first time, I seriously began thinking that maybe I would. I didn't go home the next morning. I feel like I need to make that clear. Daniel had finally done one thing right, and I wasn't going to reward him with a suitcase and a romantic reunion before breakfast. We weren't 25. We had a marriage to repair, a 9-year-old watching us closely, and enough unresolved baggage to fill the trunk of that Taurus twice over. So we took our time. Daniel continued seeing his therapist. We started couples counseling with a woman named Dr. Feldman, who had the unnerving habit of waiting 3 seconds longer than any normal person would after asking a question. You'd answer, she'd keep looking at you, and somehow you'd answer again, only this time truthfully. Daniel hated that. I found it useful. At our third session, he said I was trying to protect Claire. Dr. Feldman waited. Daniel sighed. Fine, I was protecting myself. She looked at me. I smiled. I liked her. Daniel muttered, Of course you do. I wasn't innocent either. I had made assumptions about him from the beginning. The car, the house, the way he dressed. Daniel had allowed those assumptions to remain, but I had still made them. And when Margaret gave me that folder, it had taken me exactly 48 hours to realize that I, too, could make withholding the truth sound noble if I chose the right vocabulary. So we worked through it slowly. I moved home about 3 months after I'd left. Not because Daniel asked me to. Actually, by then, he'd stopped asking. One Saturday morning, I packed my things at Ruth's. She stood in the doorway. You sure now? Good. If you were completely sure, I'd worry you'd learn nothing. That was Ruth. Comforting in the manner of a parking ticket. When I walked into the house, Sophie came flying down the stairs. She stopped herself just short of tackling me. You're staying. Yes, for real. For real. She hugged me. Daniel stood behind her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A few weeks later, Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen counter while I made dinner. Mom, where's the... She stopped. So did I. Her face turned pink. I mean, Claire. I went back to chopping an onion. Either one's fine. There was a pause. Then, very quietly, Okay, Mom. I kept chopping. I wasn't about to turn around and make that poor child responsible for whatever my face was doing. Funny thing, I had seen 7 figures on a bank screen and recovered faster. The financial part took time, too. My attorney reviewed everything. Daniel's business interests stayed his. Sophie's inheritance was protected. My retirement accounts and earnings remained mine. We created a joint household account that we both understood, right down to the boring details. There were no allowances, no tests, no surprises. Daniel once joked that our monthly financial meeting was less romantic than he'd imagined married life would be. I told him financial transparency was very sexy. He said, Please never say that again. Margaret and I took longer. We didn't become best friends. I didn't want that ending, and I doubt she did either. About 6 months later, she came by one afternoon to drop off something for Sophie. On her way out, she stopped at the front door. I misjudged you. I waited. That seemed to be the whole apology. You did. Her mouth tightened slightly. You don't make things easy, do you? I teach 4th grade. Easy people make me suspicious. To my surprise, she almost smiled. Then she left. That was enough. Vanessa took considerably longer. Eventually, I stopped keeping score. That helped more than anything Vanessa did. And then there was the Taurus. That stupid car survived all of this. One afternoon, about a year after the wedding, I finally asked Daniel why a man who could buy almost any car he wanted insisted on driving something old enough to vote. We were in the driveway. He ran his hand over the roof. My dad bought it. I assumed someone did. He ignored me. It was his last everyday car before he got sick. After he died, I kept it. I stopped joking. Sophie remembers him picking her up in it. I looked through the back window. There were still faint crayon marks near one door. Suddenly, the car looked different. Not valuable, important. You could have told me that. Daniel gave me a look. I'm getting better. You are. 6 months later, the transmission died. Daniel came home from the mechanic looking like he'd lost a Labrador. I tried to be sympathetic. I really did. You know, you're allowed to buy another car. He stared at me. That's not the point. I waited, then started laughing. He frowned. What? Oh, now you know that sentence. He understood. That was one time. You offered me a Honda. I offered to replace your Honda during a marital crisis. It needed brakes. I laughed harder. Eventually, he bought a sensible SUV. He complained about it for 6 months. The original debit card stayed in my dresser for a long time. Daniel found it one Sunday while looking for batteries. You know you've barely used this. I buy groceries. Claire, what do you want me to do? Order a yacht? I'd settle for something you actually want. A month later, I found it. Not a yacht, a table. We were at an estate sale in Chapel Hill when I saw this enormous old solid wood dining table. It had scratches down one side, a water ring near the center, and enough wear to make Daniel suspicious. You like that? I do. We own a table. I like this one. He looked at the price, then at me. With everything you could buy, this is what you want. I ran my hand over one of the scratches. Apparently, I have a type. His eyes narrowed. I like things that look cheaper than they are. He closed his eyes. You're never letting the tourists go. Are you absolutely not? We bought the table. It's still in our dining room. Sophie did homework there. We had Thanksgiving there. Margaret has eaten at it many times without clear throat once mentioning the scratches, which I consider evidence of substantial personal growth. I'm 45 now. When I think back to that morning at the bank, the money is almost the least interesting part. It exposed things. Daniel's fear, his family's suspicion, my assumptions, and eventually my own ability to justify keeping something back because I thought I had a good reason. Money didn't create those things. It just turned the lights on. Daniel and I are still married. Not because I proved I wasn't after his money. I stopped proving that a long time ago. And not because Daniel became perfect. He didn't. Neither did I. What changed was that he stopped treating trust like something I had to earn while he kept all the information. And I learned that independence didn't mean refusing everything somebody offered me. It meant being able to say yes or no without owing anyone my dignity in return. Every once in a while, Daniel still asks why I agreed to that first coffee. I always tell him the truth. You asked? I thought, why not? He hates that answer. That isn't romantic. Fine, you had a great car. He gives me the same look every time, and I laugh every time. At 37, I'd stopped looking for the one. Maybe that was why I finally saw Daniel for what he was. Not a bank account. Not a Bennett. Not somebody who could rescue me. Just a tired single dad standing beside an embarrassingly old Ford, asking if I'd like a cup of coffee. I said yes before I knew what he had. Years later, after I knew exactly what he had to decide whether to say yes again. The second yes was the one that mattered. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. And if you'd like to hear another story like mine, stick hot.